Colonel Derek Thorne had built his life on three pillars: duty, honor, and family. At 38, he commanded respect from every soldier under his command and had earned his rank through blood, sweat, and unwavering dedication to his country. His marriage to Linda had been the anchor that kept him grounded through 15 years of military service, deployments, and the chaos that came with being a special operations commander. Linda Thorne, née Rodriguez, had been the perfect military wife, or so Derek believed. She'd married him at 22, a bright-eyed college graduate who claimed to understand the sacrifices that came with loving a soldier. Their twin children, Michael and Emma, now 14, had been the light of Derek's life. Every deployment, every mission, every moment of danger had been endured with their faces in his mind. What Derek didn't know was that Linda had been living a double life for the past 3 years. Doctor? Gregory Hoffman was everything Derek wasn't: smooth, wealthy, and permanently stationed in one place. As the head of pediatric surgery at Cedar Hills Medical Center, he commanded a different kind of respect, one that came with expensive suits and country club memberships. At 42, he was divorced, sophisticated, and had developed a particular fondness for married women who felt neglected by their often absent husbands. Linda had met Gregory during Emma's appendectomy 2 years ago. What started as grateful conversations in hospital corridors had evolved into clandestine meetings, expensive gifts hidden in secret accounts, and elaborate lies about book clubs and charity events. Gregory had promised her a life of luxury, stability, and presence, everything she claimed Derek couldn't provide. The affair had grown bolder over time. Gregory had purchased a penthouse apartment across town specifically for their meetings. He'd whispered promises of marriage once Linda was free, painting pictures of European vacations and a life without the constant fear of losing her husband to war. Linda had begun to see Derek not as a hero, but as an obstacle to her happiness. What neither Linda nor Gregory knew was that Derek's latest deployment wasn't just another mission. 3 months ago, he'd been handpicked by the Pentagon for Operation Dark Water, a classified mission so sensitive that even his commanding officer couldn't know the details. The mission required a complete communication blackout. No calls, no emails, no contact with the outside world for exactly 1 year. Derek had been given 24 hours to arrange his affairs before disappearing. He tried to explain to Linda that this deployment was different, that he couldn't stay in contact, but she'd exploded in fury. "You're choosing the military over your family again," she'd screamed. "We need you here, Derek. The kids need their father." He'd held her that night, promising he'd return and make it up to them. He'd kissed his children goodbye, whispered that he loved them more than life itself, and disappeared into the shadows of classified operations. Within 2 weeks of Derek's departure, Linda had moved Gregory into the house. She told the neighbors that Derek had abandoned them, that he'd finally chosen his career over his family permanently. Michael and Emma, confused and hurt by their father's sudden absence and lack of communication, had begun to believe their mother's version of events. Gregory had played the role of the devoted stepfather perfectly. He'd attended Michael's baseball games, helped Emma with her science projects, and showered Linda with the attention she'd craved. The children, desperate for a father figure, had gradually warmed to him. Linda had convinced herself that this was the family she'd always deserved. As months passed, Linda's story became more elaborate. She told friends that Derek had been having an affair with a fellow soldier, that he'd emptied their joint account and disappeared. She'd hired a ruthless divorce attorney, Rebecca Stone, who specialized in military divorces and had a reputation for destroying soldiers' careers and finances. The plan was simple: file for divorce based on abandonment, claim sole custody of the children, and keep the house Derek had bought with his combat pay and savings. Gregory had even offered to pay for the legal fees, seeing it as an investment in their future together. But Derek Thorne wasn't just any soldier. He was a man who'd survived 3 tours in Afghanistan, who'd planned and executed operations that had changed the course of conflicts. He was a man who'd learned that in war, the greatest victories came not from strength, but from patience, intelligence, and the ability to strike when your enemy least expected it. Unknown to Linda and Gregory, Derek had been planning for this possibility long before his deployment. His years in special operations had taught him that betrayal could come from anywhere, even from those closest to you. He'd installed security systems in his house that Linda didn't know about, had financial safeguards in place, and had cultivated relationships with people who owed him favors. More importantly, Derek had inherited his grandfather's property, 200 acres of remote Montana wilderness that his family had never known about. It was there, in a cabin that officially didn't exist, that Derek had spent his leave time over the past 5 years preparing for scenarios that most people couldn't imagine. As Derek completed his mission overseas, eliminating terrorist cells and disrupting international threats, Linda and Gregory were making their final preparations. The divorce papers had been filed. The custody hearing was scheduled. Linda had already picked out her wedding dress for the ceremony she planned to have 6 months after her divorce was finalized. They believed they held all the cards. They believed Derek was just another absent soldier who'd lost his family to neglect and duty. They had no idea that the man they were betraying had spent his entire adult life learning how to identify, track, and eliminate threats to everything he held dear. The first sign that something was wrong came when Linda tried to access their joint accounts to prove Derek's abandonment. The accounts were frozen, locked by federal orders that her attorney couldn't explain or challenge. When she tried to provide evidence of Derek's disappearance, military officials would only confirm that Colonel Thorne was unavailable for comment due to ongoing classified operations. But Linda was too deep in her plans to recognize the warning signs. She pushed forward with the divorce, confident that Derek's absence would work in her favor. Gregory had assured her that once they were married, his wealth would more than compensate for any financial difficulties Derek's legal maneuvers might cause. Neither of them realized that Derek's year of silence hadn't been abandonment. It had been preparation. Every day of his deployment, every night in hostile territory, Derek had been planning for his return. He'd been building a network of allies, gathering resources, and preparing for a battle that would make his military campaigns look like practice exercises. The man who would return to face them wouldn't be the same Derek who'd kissed his family goodbye. A year of classified operations had sharpened his already formidable skills. He'd learned new techniques, made new contacts, and had been given access to resources that existed in the shadows of government operations. More importantly, Derek had discovered something during his mission that would change everything. In the depths of his classified work, he'd uncovered information about Gregory Hoffman that would make Linda's betrayal seem like a minor indiscretion in comparison. Information that would turn their carefully planned future into a nightmare they couldn't escape. As Linda prepared for the custody hearing that would give her everything she wanted, Derek was boarding a military transport that would bring him home. In his duffel bag, alongside his gear and equipment, was a single document that would destroy everything Linda and Gregory had built. A document that would prove their betrayal was just the beginning of their problems. The war was about to begin, and Derek Thorne never lost a war. Derek's return to American soil was as silent as his departure. He landed at a classified airfield in Virginia, where a black SUV waited to take him to a debriefing facility. The past year had changed him in ways that weren't immediately visible. His face carried new scars. His eyes held depths that spoke of things he could never discuss, and his body moved with the fluid precision of a man who'd spent months living on the edge of death. The debriefing took 3 days. During those 72 hours, Derek learned that his personal situation had become a matter of national security interest. His handler, a shadowy figure known only as Control, had been monitoring the situation at home. "Your wife's boyfriend is more than just a doctor," Control said, sliding a thick folder across the metal table. "Dr. Gregory Hoffman has been selling classified medical information to foreign interests, military medical records, experimental treatments, anything he can get his hands on." Derek opened the folder, his expression never changing as he read. Gregory had been using his position at the medical center to access files of military personnel and their families. He'd been selling information about experimental treatments, psychological profiles, and medical vulnerabilities to a network of foreign agents. The operation was worth millions and had compromised the health and safety of hundreds of soldiers. "The worst part," Control continued, "is that he's been using your wife to get closer to military families. She's been his unwitting accomplice, providing him with information about your colleagues, their families, their addresses, everything he needed to expand his operation." Derek's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "How long have you known?" "We've been building the case for 8 months. We needed you to complete your mission before we could move. Now that you're back, we can proceed with the arrests, but we need your help to make sure we get everyone in the network." Derek studied the files, memorizing faces, names, and connections. The betrayal was deeper than he'd imagined. Linda hadn't just been unfaithful. She'd been compromised by a foreign intelligence operation. His children had been living with a spy who'd been using them to gather information about American military families. "What do you need me to do?" Derek asked. Control smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Go to your custody hearing. Let them think they're winning. We'll be watching. When the time is right, we'll move." Derek nodded. He understood the plan, but he had modifications in mind that Control didn't need to know about. 3 days later, Derek appeared at the county courthouse. He'd deliberately chosen his dress uniform, every medal and ribbon in perfect position. He looked like exactly what he was, a decorated soldier returning from classified operations. The effect on the courthouse staff was immediate and respectful. Linda was waiting in the hallway with her attorney, Rebecca Stone. Linda had dressed carefully for the occasion, wearing a conservative black suit that was meant to convey wounded dignity. She'd lost weight during Derek's absence, and her once bright smile had been replaced by a carefully practiced expression of hurt and determination. When she saw Derek, her face went pale. The man standing before her wasn't the husband she remembered. This Derek was harder, more dangerous, and completely unreadable. For a moment, her carefully constructed confidence wavered. "Derek," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Linda," he replied, his tone neutral. He didn't ask about the children, didn't inquire about her health, didn't show any of the emotion she'd expected. His indifference was more unsettling than anger would have been. Rebecca Stone stepped forward, extending her hand. "Colonel Thorne, I'm Rebecca Stone, your wife's attorney. I hope we can resolve this matter quickly and amicably." Derek shook her hand, his grip firm but not aggressive. "I'm sure we can reach an understanding." Inside the courtroom, Judge William Hayes presided over what he believed would be a routine custody hearing. Judge Hayes was a veteran himself, having served in Vietnam before becoming a lawyer and eventually a judge. He'd seen countless military families torn apart by the demands of service and had developed a reputation for fair but firm decisions in custody cases. Linda took the stand first, her testimony carefully rehearsed. She spoke of Derek's increasing absences, his choice to prioritize military service over family, and his ultimate abandonment of his responsibilities. She painted a picture of a woman who tried desperately to hold her family together while her husband chose duty over love. "He just disappeared," she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "No calls, no letters, no support. I didn't even know if he was alive." The children kept asking where their father was, and I had no answers. We were forced to move on with our lives. Rebecca Stone built on Linda's testimony, presenting evidence of Derek's absence, the lack of financial support, and Linda's need for sole custody to provide stability for the children. She painted Derek as a man who'd abandoned his family and had no right to disrupt their lives. Now, when it was Derek's turn to present his case, he stood and walked to the counsel table. He carried no briefcase, no stack of papers, no prepared arguments. Instead, he had a single manila envelope. "Your Honor," Derek said, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to command, "I have served my country for 15 years. I have never abandoned my duty, and I have never abandoned my family." He opened the envelope and removed a single document. Walking forward to place it on Judge Hayes's desk, the courtroom fell silent as the judge read the header. Derek watched as the judge's expression changed from routine attention to shock to something approaching awe. "Ma'am," Judge Hayes said, looking directly at Linda, "your husband's absence was at the direct order of the President of the United States. This is a matter of national security." Linda's face went white. The carefully constructed narrative of abandonment crumbled in an instant, but Derek wasn't finished. "Your Honor," he continued, "I'd like to present additional evidence that's relevant to this custody hearing." He nodded toward the back of the courtroom where 2 federal agents had quietly entered. They moved with the practiced efficiency of law enforcement, their badges clearly visible. "Gregory Hoffman," one of the agents announced, "you're under arrest for espionage, treason, and conspiracy against the United States." The courtroom erupted in chaos as Gregory, who'd been sitting in the gallery supporting Linda, was handcuffed and led away. Linda's attorney was on her feet, objecting to everything, but Judge Hayes was reading additional documents that Derek had provided. "Mrs. Thorne," the judge said, his voice carrying the weight of authority, "these documents indicate that you've been living with and providing information to a foreign agent. You've compromised military families and endangered national security." Linda was shaking now, her carefully constructed world collapsing around her. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I didn't know what he was doing." Derek looked at her with cold eyes. "You knew enough," he said. "You knew enough to betray your marriage, your children, and your country." The second federal agent approached Linda. "Mrs. Thorne, you're under arrest as an accessory to espionage. You have the right to remain silent." As Linda was handcuffed and led away, she turned to Derek with tears streaming down her face. "The children," she pleaded. "Please, Derek, think about the children." Derek's expression never changed. "I am thinking about the children. I'm thinking about how they've been living with a spy for the past year. I'm thinking about how they've been used as pawns in an operation against their own country. I'm thinking about how I'm going to have to explain to them that their mother is a traitor." Judge Hayes called for order in the courtroom. "Colonel Thorne," he said, "given these circumstances, I'm awarding you full custody of your children. Mrs. Thorne's parental rights are suspended pending the outcome of her federal trial." Derek nodded. "Thank you, Your Honor." As the courtroom cleared, Derek remained standing at the counsel table. He'd won the first battle, but the war was far from over. Linda and Gregory had destroyed his family, endangered his children, and betrayed their country. The federal charges would ensure they faced justice in the legal system. But Derek's sense of justice demanded more. He'd spent a year in classified operations, learning new skills and making new contacts. He'd uncovered networks of betrayal that went deeper than anyone realized. And now, with his children in his custody and his enemies in federal custody, he could begin the real work of ensuring that betrayal was answered with consequences that would last a lifetime. The man who walked out of that courthouse wasn't just a father reclaiming his children. He was a soldier with a mission, one that would reshape everything his enemies thought they could control. He was a soldier who'd identified his enemies and was preparing to wage a war that would teach them that some betrayals carry prices that can never be fully paid. The federal holding facility was a stark, unforgiving place where Linda Thorne found herself sharing a cell with women whose crimes ranged from tax evasion to international arms dealing. The reality of her situation had hit her like a physical blow. She was facing charges of accessory to espionage, conspiracy against the United States, and endangering national security. The woman, who thought she was planning a comfortable new life with a successful doctor, was now facing the possibility of spending the rest of her life in federal prison. Gregory Hoffman's situation was even more dire. As the primary target of the federal investigation, he was being held in solitary confinement while federal agents built their case against him. The sophisticated spy network he'd constructed over 5 years was being dismantled piece by piece, and his cooperation was the only thing standing between him and a life sentence. Derek spent his first week home focused on his children. Michael and Emma had been living with lies for a year, believing their father had abandoned them while growing attached to a man who'd been using them to gather intelligence on American military families. The reunion was awkward and painful, filled with confused questions and hurt feelings that would take time to heal. "Dad, why didn't you call us?" Emma asked on their second night together. She was 14 now, more mature than when he'd left, but still young enough to need her father's protection and guidance. "I couldn't, sweetheart," Derek said, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes, when you serve your country, you have to make sacrifices that hurt the people you love most. I never wanted to leave you, and I never stopped thinking about you and your brother." Michael was harder to reach. At 14, he'd been old enough to understand the implications of his father's absence, and had grown bitter about what he perceived as abandonment. Gregory had filled that void, becoming the father figure Michael had needed during crucial months of his development. "Gregory said you chose the military over us," Michael said during a tense dinner conversation. He said, "Real fathers don't abandon their families." Derek set down his fork and looked at his son. "Gregory was a spy, Michael. He was using our family to gather information that he sold to enemies of our country. Everything he told you was a lie designed to turn you against me so he could continue his operation." The truth was brutal, but Derek had learned that lies, even comfortable ones, only led to deeper pain. His children needed to understand the reality of what they'd been living through, even if it was difficult to accept. Over the following days, federal agents interviewed the children extensively. They needed to understand what information Gregory had gathered and how he'd used the family to expand his network. The interviews revealed the scope of Gregory's manipulation. He'd used family dinners and casual conversations to gather intelligence about Derek's colleagues, their families, and their vulnerabilities. While Derek worked to rebuild his relationship with his children, he was also planning the next phase of his campaign against those who had betrayed him. The federal charges were just the beginning. Derek had learned during his classified operations that some forms of justice existed outside the legal system, and some betrayals demanded prices that courts couldn't impose. His first target was Rebecca Stone, Linda's attorney. Derek's investigation revealed that Stone had been aware of Gregory's criminal activities, and had been paid significantly more than her standard fees to ensure the divorce proceeded quickly and quietly. She'd been planning to help Linda and Gregory disappear to a non-extradition country once the divorce was finalized. Derek's approach to Stone was subtle and devastating. Using contacts from his classified work, he arranged for Stone's other clients to learn about her involvement with foreign agents. Word spread quickly through the legal community that Stone had been compromised by enemy intelligence operations. Within 2 weeks, she'd lost every client and was facing disbarment proceedings. But Derek's most sophisticated revenge was reserved for the network of people who'd supported Linda's lies and helped her maintain her deception. These were neighbors, friends, and family members who'd chosen to believe Linda's version of events without question, and had helped her isolate Derek's children from their father's memory. Derek's military training had taught him that the most effective operations were those that turned enemies against each other. He began a carefully orchestrated campaign of psychological warfare that would make Linda's supporters understand the price of betraying a soldier's family. Margaret Henley, Linda's closest friend and most vocal supporter, was the first to experience Derek's retaliation. Margaret had spread rumors about Derek's abandonment throughout their social circle and had helped Linda maintain her lies. Derek arranged for Margaret's husband to receive anonymous packages containing evidence of Margaret's own betrayals, affairs she'd been conducting while publicly supporting Linda's moral crusade against Derek. The evidence was devastating and undeniable. Within days, Margaret's marriage was destroyed. Her reputation in the community was in ruins, and she was facing her own divorce proceedings. When she tried to contact Linda for support, she learned that Linda was in federal custody and unable to help anyone. Derek's campaign against Linda's support network continued systematically. Each day, another person experienced the ripple effects of their betrayal, until the web Linda had spun began to unravel completely. Each person who'd chosen to believe Linda's lies and had helped her maintain her deception found themselves facing consequences that destroyed their carefully constructed lives. Derek used his military contacts, his intelligence training, and his understanding of human nature to identify and exploit the weaknesses of everyone who'd betrayed his family. The beauty of Derek's revenge was its precision. He didn't target innocent people or cause random destruction. Every person who faced consequences had actively participated in the betrayal of his family. They'd chosen to believe lies, spread rumors, and help isolate his children from their father's memory. Now, they were learning that choices have consequences, even when those consequences come months or years later. Meanwhile, Linda's situation was deteriorating rapidly. Her federal defenders were negotiating a plea agreement that would require her to testify against Gregory and provide information about everyone who'd helped her maintain her deception. The comfortable life she'd planned with Gregory had become a nightmare of legal proceedings, federal investigations, and the growing realization that she'd destroyed everything she'd once claimed to value. Gregory's situation was even worse. The federal investigation had uncovered the full scope of his espionage activities, including the sale of medical information that had led to the deaths of American soldiers overseas. He was facing multiple life sentences and the possibility of execution for treason. His sophisticated spy network had been completely dismantled, and his foreign contacts had abandoned him to face American justice alone. Derek visited Linda in federal custody exactly once. The meeting took place in a sterile conference room under the supervision of federal marshals. Linda had aged years in the few weeks since her arrest. Her hair was unkempt, her face was drawn, and her once confident demeanor had been replaced by desperate fear. "Derek, please," she begged, tears streaming down her face. "I know I made mistakes, but I never meant for this to happen. I never knew Gregory was a spy. I just wanted to be happy." Derek looked at her with the same cold expression he'd worn in the courtroom. "You wanted to be happy," he repeated. "So you destroyed our marriage, betrayed our children, and helped a foreign agent gather intelligence on American military families. Your definition of happiness required the destruction of everything I held sacred. The children need their mother, Linda pleaded. Whatever you think of me, they need. The children need to be protected from traitors, Derek interrupted. They need to understand that choices have consequences, and that loyalty isn't negotiable. You chose Gregory over your family. You chose lies over truth. Now you'll live with those choices. Derek stood to leave, then paused at the door. I want you to understand something, Linda. The federal charges are just the beginning. You destroyed my family and endangered my children. The government will punish you for your crimes against the country, but I will ensure you understand the personal cost of betraying a soldier's family. As Derek walked away from the federal facility, he was already planning the next phase of his campaign. Linda and Gregory would spend the rest of their lives in federal prison, but their extended network of supporters and enablers would face a different kind of justice. They would learn that some men never forgive, never forget, and never stop fighting for what they believe in. The war Derek had declared on his family's betrayers was entering its most sophisticated phase. His enemies had underestimated the man they'd betrayed, assuming that his honor and his commitment to legal justice would limit his response. They were about to learn that a soldier's honor didn't prevent him from using every weapon at his disposal to protect what he held sacred. The foundation of their comfortable lives was about to crumble, and Derek Thorne would be the architect of their destruction. 2 months after the custody hearing, Derek's systematic dismantling of Linda's support network had reached its full momentum. What had begun as targeted retaliation against specific individuals had evolved into a comprehensive operation that demonstrated the reach and sophistication of Derek's capabilities. Every person who had participated in the campaign against his family was discovering that their past choices carried present consequences. Dr. Patricia Vance, Linda's sister and a prominent psychiatrist, had been one of the most vocal supporters of Linda's narrative. She'd used her professional credentials to publicly question Derek's fitness as a father, and had written letters to the court describing him as an absent parent who prioritized military service over family obligations. Patricia had believed her professional reputation and social standing made her untouchable. Derek's response was clinical in its precision. Using his intelligence contacts, he arranged for Patricia's professional activities to be scrutinized by medical boards and ethics committees. The investigation revealed that Patricia had been prescribing medications to patients without proper evaluation, had been conducting unauthorized research using patient data, and had been billing insurance companies for services never provided. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Patricia's medical license was suspended, her research was discredited, and she was facing criminal charges for insurance fraud. Her prestigious career was destroyed, her reputation was in ruins, and she was confronting the possibility of prison time. When she tried to contact Derek to negotiate some form of resolution, she learned that he wasn't interested in her explanations or her apologies. He had made it clear, some betrayals demand a reckoning, and her choices had sealed her fate. Robert Chun, the assistant to Linda's divorce attorney, had been instrumental in building the case against Derek. He'd helped gather evidence of Derek's absence, had researched military regulations to find ways to challenge Derek's classified status, and had worked overtime to ensure the divorce proceedings moved quickly. Robert had seen Derek as just another absent soldier whose wife deserved better treatment. Derek's investigation revealed that Robert had been selling confidential client information to private investigators and rival law firms. The evidence showed years of systematic breach of attorney-client privilege, with Robert profiting from sensitive information about custody cases, divorces, and family disputes. When Derek presented this evidence to the State Bar Association, Robert's career in law was finished immediately. But Derek's most sophisticated operation was reserved for the social network that had embraced Linda's story and had helped her maintain her deception within their community. These were the neighbors, friends, and acquaintances who had chosen to believe Linda's version of events without question and had helped spread the narrative that Derek had abandoned his family. The centerpiece of this network was the Riverside Hills Homeowners Association, an influential group that controlled much of the social and economic activity in Derek's neighborhood. The association had been dominated by a clique of wealthy wives who had embraced Linda as a victim of military neglect, and had used her story to support their own complaints about absent husbands and family priorities. Derek's approach to the Homeowners Association was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. He began by identifying the association's financial vulnerabilities, questionable expenditures, unauthorized projects, and personal use of association funds by board members. Then he systematically exposed these problems to the broader community, using his understanding of group dynamics to turn members against each other. The association president, Jennifer Walsh, had been Linda's closest ally and most vocal supporter. She'd organized support groups for abandoned military wives and had publicly criticized Derek's character and parenting abilities. Jennifer had believed her social position and community influence made her immune to retaliation. Derek arranged for Jennifer's husband to receive detailed evidence of her extensive affair with the association's landscaping contractor. The evidence included photographs, financial records showing association funds used to pay for romantic getaways, and recordings of conversations planning their future together. Jennifer's marriage collapsed within days. Her position in the association was terminated, and she was facing lawsuits from multiple parties. The beauty of Derek's operation was that each revelation created additional chaos and suspicion within the group. The very network that had united to isolate him and his children was now unraveling from within, plagued by distrust and the knowledge that no secret was safe. As members discovered that their leaders had been corrupt and deceptive, they began questioning everything they'd been told, including the story about Derek's abandonment of his family. The social network that had supported Linda's lies began to crumble, as trust and loyalty gave way to suspicion and self-preservation. Derek's children watched these developments with growing understanding of what their father was capable of when his family was threatened. Michael, who had initially been hostile to Derek's return, began to appreciate the methodical nature of his father's response to betrayal. Emma, always more intuitive than her brother, recognized that their father's actions were driven by love and protection, even when those actions seemed harsh. "Dad," Emma said one evening as they reviewed homework together, "are you going to keep doing this to everyone who believed Mom's story?" Derek looked at his daughter, choosing his words carefully. "I'm going to make sure that everyone who participated in hurting our family understands that their choices had consequences. Some people think they can lie about soldiers and military families without facing any results. They need to learn that's not true." "But when will it stop?" Emma asked. "When I'm satisfied that everyone who betrayed us has paid an appropriate price for their choices," Derek replied. "When I'm confident that no one will try to hurt our family again." Meanwhile, Linda's situation in federal custody had become increasingly desperate. Her attorneys were pushing for a plea agreement that would require her to provide testimony against Gregory and his entire network. The federal prosecutors were offering a reduced sentence in exchange for her cooperation, but even the reduced sentence would mean decades in prison. Gregory's situation was hopeless. The federal investigation had revealed that his espionage activities had resulted in the deaths of American soldiers overseas. The medical information he'd sold to foreign agents had been used to target military personnel and their families. He was facing multiple death sentences and had no bargaining power with prosecutors. During his second and final visit to Linda in federal custody, Derek brought photographs of their children's recent activities, school events, sports games, and family dinners. Linda looked at the pictures with tears streaming down her face, understanding that she was seeing a life she would never be part of again. "They're doing well," Derek said, his voice neutral. "They're beginning to understand what really happened and why. They're learning to trust me again." "Derek, please," Linda whispered. "I know I can never fix what I've done, but please don't turn them against me completely. I'm still their mother." Derek looked at her with the same cold expression she'd seen in the courtroom. "You stopped being their mother when you chose to betray their father and endanger their safety. You're a traitor to your country and your family. That's how they'll remember you. The children will hate you for this," Linda said, desperation creeping into her voice. "When they're older, they'll understand that you destroyed their mother's life." Derek smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. "The children will understand that I protected them from a traitor and a spy. They'll understand that I eliminated threats to their safety and their future. They'll understand that loyalty and honor aren't negotiable, and that betrayal carries a price that must be paid." As Derek walked away from the federal facility for the final time, he was already planning the next phase of his operation. Linda and Gregory would spend the rest of their lives in federal prison, but their extended network of supporters still needed to understand the full consequences of their choices. The war, Derek had declared, was entering its final phase, but the most devastating attacks were yet to come, and his enemies had underestimated not just his capabilities, but his commitment to ensuring that betrayal was answered with consequences that would last for generations. The foundation of every comfortable life built on the betrayal of his family was about to crumble completely, and Derek Thorne would be the architect of their absolute destruction. 6 months after the custody hearing, Derek's campaign had evolved from targeted retaliation into a comprehensive demonstration of what happened when a military strategist decided that certain betrayals demanded permanent consequences. The network of people who had supported Linda's deception was discovering that their comfortable lives had been built on foundations that Derek could destroy at will. The most devastating phase of Derek's operation targeted the financial stability of his enemies. Using his intelligence, contacts, and military network, Derek had identified the economic vulnerabilities of everyone who had participated in the campaign against his family. What followed was a systematic destruction of careers, investments, and financial security that demonstrated the reach of Derek's capabilities. Thomas Brennan, the mortgage broker who had helped Linda hide assets and plan for her new life with Gregory, found himself facing federal investigation for mortgage fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. Derek had provided federal authorities with evidence showing that Brennan had been facilitating illegal financial transactions for multiple clients, including several with connections to foreign intelligence operations. The investigation revealed that Brennan's entire business model was built on criminal activity. He lost his license, his assets were frozen, and he was facing decades in federal prison. His family lost their home, their savings, and their place in the community. When Brennan attempted to contact Derek to negotiate some form of resolution, he learned that Derek wasn't interested in deals or compromises. Sandra Mitchell, the family court counselor who had supported Linda's custody petition and had written reports questioning Derek's fitness as a parent, discovered that her professional credibility had been systematically destroyed. Derek's investigation revealed that Mitchell had been taking bribes from attorneys to influence her recommendations in custody cases. The evidence was overwhelming and had been building for months. Mitchell's reports in dozens of cases were called into question, leading to appeals and reversals that destroyed families and damaged children. She lost her position, her professional certifications, and faced criminal charges for corruption. The children she had claimed to protect had been used as pawns in her money-making scheme. But Derek's most sophisticated attack was reserved for the network of military wives who had embraced Linda's story and had used it to support their own complaints about military service and family sacrifice. These women had created a support group that publicly criticized military families and had used Derek's situation as an example of military neglect and abandonment. Derek's response was to expose the hypocrisy and illegal activities within their own families. Using his military intelligence contacts, he arranged for their husbands' commanding officers to receive detailed information about conduct that violated military regulations and federal laws. Colonel James Morrison's wife, Helen, had been one of Linda's most vocal supporters and had used Derek's story in presentations about military family dysfunction. Derek's investigation revealed that Helen had been running an illegal gambling operation on the military base, using her position as a colonel's wife to recruit customers and avoid detection. The investigation expanded to reveal a network of illegal activities among military wives, including unauthorized gambling, distribution of illegal substances, and theft of military property. Helen and her associates were arrested in a coordinated operation that made national news and destroyed the reputation of everyone involved. Derek's children watched these developments with growing understanding of their father's capabilities and his commitment to protecting their family. Michael, now 15, had come to appreciate the methodical nature of his father's response to betrayal. He understood that their father wasn't acting out of anger or revenge, but out of a calculated determination to ensure that threats to their family were permanently eliminated. "Dad," Michael said one evening as they worked on a school project together, "some of my friends' parents are asking questions about what's happening to all these people. They're scared." Derek looked up from the project, meeting his son's eyes. "Sometimes, Michael," he said quietly, "people need to see the consequences of their actions. Fear is a natural response when people realize their actions have consequences. The people who are facing problems now made choices to hurt our family. They thought there would be no price to pay for their betrayal." "But when does it end?" Michael asked. "When I'm satisfied that everyone understands the cost of betraying a soldier's family," Derek replied. "When I'm confident that no one will ever again think they can destroy what we've built without facing permanent consequences." Emma, now more mature at 15, had developed a deeper understanding of the situation. "Dad, Mom's trial is starting next month. Are you going to testify?" Derek nodded. "I'll testify about the damage her betrayal caused to our family and to national security. The jury needs to understand that her choices weren't just personal failures. They were acts of treason that endangered American soldiers and their families." The federal trial of Linda Thorne and Gregory Hoffman had become a media sensation. The case involved espionage, treason, and a network of corruption that had reached into military communities, medical facilities, and legal offices. Derek's role as both victim and key witness had made him a central figure in a story that captured national attention. Linda's defense attorneys were attempting to portray her as an innocent victim who had been manipulated by Gregory. They argued that she was a lonely military wife who had been seduced by a sophisticated spy and had unknowingly provided information that was used against her country. The strategy required painting Derek as an absent husband whose neglect had created the circumstances that led to Linda's betrayal. Derek's testimony destroyed that narrative completely. He appeared in court in full dress uniform, every medal and ribbon in perfect position. His testimony was precise, factual, and devastating. He described Linda's systematic betrayal of their marriage, her deliberate choice to provide Gregory with information about military families, and her active participation in a campaign to destroy Derek's relationship with their children. Mrs. Thorne made conscious choices to betray her marriage, her children, and her country, Derek testified. She wasn't a victim of manipulation. She was an active participant in an operation designed to harm American military personnel and their families. She chose personal pleasure over national security, and she continued making those choices even when she understood the consequences. The prosecutor presented evidence showing that Linda had been aware of Gregory's suspicious activities and had chosen to ignore red flags that would have been obvious to any reasonable person. Phone records showed conversations where Linda had discussed the need to be careful and to keep their relationship secret from the wrong people. Financial records showed that Linda had received expensive gifts and payments that far exceeded what a doctor's salary could support. The truth was undeniable, and the jury could clearly see the extent of Linda's betrayal. Most damaging was evidence that Linda had actively recruited other military wives to provide information to Gregory. She had organized social events specifically designed to gather intelligence about military families, their schedules, their vulnerabilities, and their personal information. The network she had helped create had compromised the security of dozens of military personnel and their families. Gregory's defense was even more hopeless. The evidence against him was overwhelming and undeniable. Phone calls to foreign contacts, financial transactions with enemy agents, and detailed records of the intelligence he had provided to hostile nations. His sophisticated spy network had been completely exposed, and his cooperation was the only thing preventing him from facing immediate execution. During the trial, Derek's systematic destruction of Linda's support network continued. Each day brought new revelations about the corruption and criminal activity of people who had participated in the campaign against Derek's family. The media coverage of these parallel investigations created a narrative that Derek was not just a victim seeking justice, but a force of nature eliminating threats to military families everywhere. Judge Margaret Foster, who presided over the federal trial, had served as a military attorney before becoming a federal judge. She understood the implications of the case and the broader threat that Gregory's network had posed to national security. Her rulings consistently favored the prosecution, and her comments from the bench made clear that she viewed Linda and Gregory's actions as among the most serious crimes that could be committed against the United States. This case involves more than adultery or family dysfunction, Judge Foster stated during jury instructions. The defendants participated in activities that directly threaten the lives and safety of American military personnel and their families. Their actions constitute treason of the highest order, and the consequences must reflect the severity of their crimes. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Linda was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Gregory was sentenced to death, with execution scheduled for the following year. The extensive network of accomplices faced sentences ranging from decades in prison to life imprisonment. Derek sat in the courtroom as the sentences were read, his expression never changing. Justice had been served in the legal system, but his personal campaign was far from complete. The people who had supported Linda's lies and had helped her maintain her deception still needed to understand the full consequences of their choices. As Derek left the courthouse, reporters surrounded him, seeking comments on the verdicts and the broader investigation into Linda's support network. Derek's response was measured and deliberate. "The legal system has done its job," he said, his voice steady and calm. "But this isn't just about legal justice. It's about ensuring that everyone who participated in the betrayal of my family understands the true cost of their actions. This is far from over." Linda Thorne and Gregory Hoffman chose to betray their country and endanger military families, Derek said, his voice carrying a quiet authority. They've now faced the legal consequences of those choices. Everyone who participated in their network of deception and betrayal will face appropriate consequences as well. Loyalty isn't negotiable, and betrayal carries a price that must be paid. 1 year after the federal trial, Derek's campaign had achieved something remarkable. It had become a cautionary tale that resonated throughout military communities and beyond. The systematic destruction of Linda's support network had sent a message that betraying a military family carried consequences that extended far beyond legal proceedings. Derek had created a legend around his name that would protect military families for generations to come. The final phase of Derek's operation was the most personal and the most devastating. He had saved his most sophisticated revenge for the people who had directly participated in turning his children against him. These were the individuals who had filled Michael and Emma's minds with lies about their father, who had encouraged them to see Derek as an abandoning parent rather than a serving soldier. Dr. Amanda Foster, the children's school counselor, had been instrumental in supporting Linda's narrative within the school system. She had provided emotional counseling to Michael and Emma that reinforced the idea that their father had chosen military service over family responsibility. She had written reports documenting the children's emotional distress and had recommended limiting Derek's parental rights based on his pattern of abandonment. Derek's investigation revealed that Foster had been systematically manipulating vulnerable children for years, using her position to implant ideas and emotions that served her personal agenda. She had been receiving payments from divorce attorneys to provide testimony that supported their clients' custody cases regardless of the truth or the best interests of the children involved. The evidence was overwhelming. Foster had violated every ethical standard of her profession, had damaged countless children and families, and had profited from the destruction of family relationships. When Derek presented this evidence to school administrators and professional licensing boards, Foster's career was destroyed immediately. She faced criminal charges for child abuse and corruption, and every case she had ever worked on was called into question. But Derek's most devastating attack was reserved for the person who had done the most damage to his relationship with his children, Linda's mother, Dorothy Rodriguez. Dorothy had been living in Derek's house during his deployment, serving as the children's primary caregiver and filling their minds with poisonous lies about their father. Dorothy had convinced Michael and Emma that Derek had abandoned them permanently, that he had chosen military glory over family responsibility, and that Gregory was a better father figure who truly cared about their well-being. She had systematically erased Derek's presence from the household, removing photographs, military memorabilia, and anything that reminded the children of their father's service and sacrifice. Derek's response to Dorothy was personal and devastating. Using his intelligence contacts, he arranged for Dorothy to be investigated for immigration fraud, tax evasion, and identity theft. The investigation revealed that Dorothy had been living in the United States illegally for over 20 years, had been using false documents to obtain employment and benefits, and had been involved in a network of illegal immigrants who were committing various crimes. The evidence was undeniable, and Dorothy's arrest was swift and public. She was deported to Mexico within weeks, losing everything she had built in America and facing criminal charges in multiple jurisdictions. Her removal from the children's lives was immediate and permanent, eliminating the primary source of poison that had been turned against Derek. But Derek's most sophisticated operation was still to come. He had identified a network of corruption within the family court system that had enabled Linda's lies and had nearly cost him his relationship with his children. This network included judges, attorneys, court officers, and social workers who had been taking bribes and manipulating cases for personal profit. Derek's military intelligence training had taught him how to identify and exploit systemic corruption. Working with federal authorities, he had been building a case against the family court network for over a year. The investigation involved wiretaps, financial surveillance, and undercover operations that revealed the scope of corruption within the system. The culmination of this investigation was a coordinated federal raid that arrested dozens of court officials, attorneys, and support personnel. The charges ranged from bribery and corruption to racketeering and conspiracy. The entire family court system was revealed to be a criminal enterprise that had been destroying families and damaging children for financial profit. Judge Patricia Williams, who had initially presided over Derek's custody case before recusing herself, was arrested for taking bribes from attorneys and manipulating case outcomes. Her corruption had affected hundreds of families and had caused immeasurable damage to children and parents who had trusted the system to protect their interests. The investigation revealed that Linda's case had been part of a broader pattern of corruption designed to favor certain attorneys and their clients, all at the expense of justice and genuine family well-being. Rebecca Stone, Linda's attorney, had been paying bribes to ensure favorable rulings in her cases, and Derek's situation had been manipulated from the beginning to ensure Linda would receive custody and financial support. Derek's testimony in the family court corruption trial was devastating. He described how the system had been rigged against military families, how judges and attorneys had conspired to punish soldiers for their service, and how children had been used as pawns in a money-making scheme that destroyed families for profit. The corruption in this court system represents a betrayal of every family that trusted it to protect their children, Derek testified. These officials took bribes to destroy families, manipulate children, and punish parents who served their country. They turned the family court into a criminal enterprise that damaged everyone it touched. The trial resulted in dozens of convictions and prison sentences. The entire family court system was restructured with new oversight and accountability measures designed to prevent future corruption. Derek's role in exposing the corruption made him a hero to military families and a symbol of the fight against systemic betrayal. As the various trials and investigations concluded, Derek's children had grown into young adults who understood the full scope of what their father had accomplished. Michael, now 16, had developed a deep respect for his father's commitment to justice and his refusal to accept betrayal without consequences. "Dad," Michael said one evening as they reviewed college applications together, "I understand now why you did everything you did. You weren't just protecting us. You were protecting every military family that could have been hurt by these people." Emma, also 16, had developed her own understanding of the situation. "You taught us that loyalty isn't just a word, and that standing up for what's right sometimes means fighting battles that other people don't understand." Derek looked at his children with pride. They had survived betrayal, corruption, and systematic attempts to poison their minds against their father. They had emerged stronger, wiser, and more committed to the values that Derek had tried to instill in them from birth. "The most important lesson," Derek said, "is that some battles are worth fighting regardless of the cost. When people try to destroy your family, betray your trust, or harm the people you love, you don't negotiate or compromise. You fight until the threat is eliminated completely." Linda remained in federal prison, serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Gregory had been executed 6 months earlier, his death marking the end of the spy network that had threatened American military families. Dorothy had been deported and banned from returning to the United States. The network of corruption that had enabled their betrayal had been destroyed completely. Derek had achieved something unprecedented. His campaign had become a legend throughout military communities, a lasting warning that families who dedicate their lives to service should never be underestimated or left unprotected. He had not only protected his family from betrayal, but had eliminated the systemic threats that could have harmed other military families in the future. His campaign had become legendary within military communities, a cautionary tale that would protect soldiers and their families for generations to come. The man who had returned from classified operations to find his family destroyed by betrayal had rebuilt his life and had created a legacy that would endure long after the immediate threats had been eliminated. Derek Thorne had proven that some men never forgive, never forget, and never stop fighting for what they believe in. His war was over, but his victory was permanent. 2 years after the final trials concluded, Derek's children had graduated high school and were preparing for college. The house that had once been filled with lies and betrayal had become a home again, strengthened by the shared understanding of what they had survived together. Michael and Emma had grown into young adults who carried their father's values and understood the price of loyalty and the consequences of betrayal. Derek had spent the past year documenting everything that had happened, creating a comprehensive record of the betrayal his family had faced, and the methods he had used to eliminate the threats against them. This documentation served multiple purposes. It was a training manual for other military families facing similar situations, a cautionary tale for those who might consider betraying soldiers, and a legacy for his children that would guide them throughout their lives. The impact of Derek's campaign had extended far beyond his personal situation. Military communities across the country had adopted new protocols for protecting families during deployments. Support networks had been restructured to prevent the kind of systematic betrayal that Linda had orchestrated. Family court systems had implemented oversight measures designed to prevent corruption and protect military families from judicial bias. Derek's name had become synonymous with the principle that betraying a military family carried consequences that would last for generations. His story was taught in military leadership courses as an example of strategic thinking and systematic problem-solving. Intelligence agencies studied his methods as examples of how to identify and eliminate threats to national security. But for Derek, the most important outcome was the relationship he had rebuilt with his children. Michael and Emma had not only forgiven him for the harsh methods he had used to protect them, they had come to understand that those methods had been necessary to ensure their safety and their future. Michael had been accepted to West Point, following in his father's footsteps with a commitment to military service that had been strengthened by his understanding of what soldiers sacrificed for their country. The story of Derek Thorne and his family had become a testament to the power of honor, loyalty, and the enduring strength of those who serve and protect. His application essay had described the lessons he had learned about loyalty, honor, and the price of betrayal. His interview had impressed the Academy officials with his maturity and his understanding of military values. "Dad," Michael said as they prepared for his departure to West Point, "I want you to know that everything you did to protect our family has made me a better person. I understand now that being a soldier means more than just serving your country. It means protecting the people who depend on you, no matter what the cost." Emma had been accepted to Georgetown University with plans to study international relations and eventually join the State Department. Her understanding of espionage, betrayal, and national security had been shaped by her family's experience, and she was committed to serving her country in the diplomatic arena. "I want to help prevent the kind of threats that our family faced," Emma said. "I want to work in intelligence and counterintelligence so that other families don't have to go through what we went through." Derek looked at his children with pride and satisfaction. They had not only survived the betrayal and corruption that had tried to destroy their family, they had emerged stronger and more committed to the values that he had tried to instill in them. They understood that loyalty wasn't negotiable, that betrayal carried permanent consequences, and that some battles were worth fighting regardless of the personal cost. The final chapter of Derek's campaign came when he received a letter from Linda in federal prison. She had been serving her life sentence for 2 years, and had apparently spent that time reflecting on her choices and their consequences. The letter was filled with apologies, regrets, and pleas for some form of forgiveness or reconciliation. Linda wrote about her loneliness in prison, her regret for the choices she had made, and her desperate desire to somehow rebuild a relationship with the children she would never see again. She claimed to have found faith, to have developed a new understanding of loyalty and family, and to have learned the error of her ways through years of reflection and suffering. Derek read the letter once, and then burned it without responding. Linda's regrets and apologies were meaningless to him. She had made conscious choices to betray her family and her country, and those choices had permanent consequences that could never be reversed. Her suffering in prison was the price she had agreed to pay when she chose Gregory over her family, lies over truth, and personal pleasure over national security. The final test of Derek's values came when Michael and Emma asked him about their mother's letter. They had learned about it through prison officials who had hoped Derek might allow some form of contact between Linda and her children. Derek listened quietly to his children's questions, considering how best to answer in a way that would honor the truth and the values he had fought so fiercely to defend. Both Michael and Emma were curious about their mother's situation and wondered if some form of limited relationship might be possible. Derek's response was clear and uncompromising. "Your mother made choices that destroyed our family and endangered your safety. She chose to betray her marriage, her children, and her country. Those choices have permanent consequences that cannot be reversed by apologies or regrets. She is a traitor, and traitors don't deserve forgiveness or reconciliation. But she's still our mother," Emma said quietly. "She stopped being your mother when she chose to betray your father and endanger your lives," Derek replied. "Biology doesn't create family. Loyalty does, choice does, honor does. Your mother chose to abandon those values, and she chose to abandon you when she made that decision." Derek's children accepted his decision without argument. They had learned to trust their father's judgment, and to understand that his harsh responses to betrayal were motivated by love and protection rather than cruelty or revenge. They understood that Derek's refusal to forgive wasn't based on personal anger, but on the principle that some actions carried consequences that could never be reversed. As Derek prepared to send his children off to college, he reflected on everything that had happened and everything he had accomplished. He had faced betrayal that would have destroyed most men, but he had responded with strategic thinking, systematic planning, and unwavering commitment to protecting his family. The network of people who had betrayed his family had been completely destroyed. Linda would spend the rest of her life in federal prison. Gregory had been executed for treason. The corruption within the family court system had been eliminated. The support network that had enabled Linda's deception had been dismantled piece by piece. More importantly, Derek had rebuilt his relationship with his children and had taught them lessons about loyalty, honor, and consequences that would guide them throughout their lives. They understood that betrayal was unforgivable, that loyalty was non-negotiable, and that protecting family required whatever methods were necessary to eliminate threats. Derek's legacy was secure. His story would be told in military communities for generations, a cautionary tale about the consequences of betraying a soldier's family. His methods would be studied by intelligence agencies and law enforcement organizations as examples of systematic threat elimination. His values would be carried forward by his children and their children, ensuring that the lessons of loyalty and honor would endure. The man who had returned from classified operations to find his family destroyed by betrayal had rebuilt his life and had created something permanent and unbreakable. Derek Thorne had proven that some men never forgive, never forget, and never stop fighting for what they believe in. His war was over, but his victory would last forever. 5 years after the final trials, Derek's campaign had evolved from personal revenge into something much larger, a systematic transformation of how military families were protected and how betrayal was addressed within military communities. Derek had been approached by senior Pentagon officials who wanted to formalize his methods and create new protocols for protecting military families from the kinds of threats his family had faced. Derek's consulting work with the Department of Defense led to the creation of new intelligence units specifically designed to identify and eliminate threats to military families. His expertise in counterintelligence, psychological operations, and systematic threat elimination had become invaluable to military leadership, who understood that protecting soldiers meant protecting their families as well. The Thorn Protocols, as they had come to be known within military circles, provided comprehensive guidance for identifying, investigating, and eliminating threats to military families. These protocols included everything from financial security measures to counterintelligence operations to systematic response strategies for situations involving betrayal or compromise. Derek's work also led to the creation of new legal frameworks for prosecuting crimes against military families. Federal legislation was passed that created enhanced penalties for espionage activities targeting military personnel, corruption within family court systems, and systematic campaigns designed to destroy military families. Michael had graduated from West Point with highest honors and had been commissioned as a second lieutenant in Army intelligence. His undergraduate thesis was a detailed analysis of his father's campaign, examining the strategic thinking and tactical execution that had led to the complete elimination of threats to their family. The thesis had become required reading at the academy and had established Michael as a rising star in military intelligence. Emma had graduated from Georgetown with degrees in international relations and intelligence studies. She had been recruited by the CIA immediately upon graduation and was working in counterintelligence operations designed to protect American interests overseas. Her understanding of espionage networks and systematic betrayal had made her invaluable in identifying and eliminating foreign intelligence operations targeting American personnel. Both of Derek's children had internalized the lessons their father had taught them about loyalty, honor, and the permanent consequences of betrayal. They had become leaders in their respective fields, carrying forward the values that Derek had instilled in them, and applying those values to protect other American families from the kinds of threats they had faced. The impact of Derek's campaign extended far beyond his immediate family, resonating through the armed forces and changing how an entire nation thought about the meaning of service, sacrifice, and the price of betrayal. Military divorce rates had declined significantly as potential betrayers understood the consequences of targeting military families. Family court corruption had been virtually eliminated through new oversight measures, and the understanding that crimes against military families would be prosecuted with unprecedented severity. Foreign intelligence operations targeting American military personnel had been disrupted repeatedly as enemy agents learned that compromising military families led to systematic retaliation that destroyed entire networks. Derek's reputation had become a deterrent that protected American interests around the world. But Derek's most important achievement was the cultural transformation he had created within military communities. The understanding that betraying a military family carried permanent consequences had created a new standard of loyalty and support that strengthened military families across all branches of service. The annual Thorn Foundation dinner had become the premier event for military families, bringing together thousands of soldiers and their families to celebrate loyalty, honor, and the sacrifice that military service required. Derek's speech at each year's dinner reinforced the values that had guided his campaign and continued to guide military families in their daily lives. Military families face unique challenges and unique threats, Derek said at the most recent dinner. We deploy to dangerous places. We serve in classified operations, and we make sacrifices that civilian families cannot understand. Those sacrifices make us vulnerable to people who would exploit our service for their own benefit. But we also have unique strengths, Derek continued. We have training, resources, and networks that allow us to protect our families in ways that civilian families cannot. We have the ability to identify threats, investigate betrayal, and eliminate dangers before they can destroy what we hold most dear. The most important lesson my family learned is that betrayal is not a mistake or a moment of weakness. It is a choice that carries permanent consequences. People who choose to betray military families must understand that they are declaring war on people who are uniquely qualified to fight and win that war. Derek's foundation provided resources and support for military families facing betrayal, corruption, or systematic threats. The foundation's legal team specialized in military family law and had achieved unprecedented success in protecting military families from court bias and systematic discrimination. The Foundation's intelligence unit provided counterintelligence support for military families who suspected they were being targeted by foreign operations. Most importantly, the Foundation provided training and education that helped military families identify and respond to threats before those threats could cause significant damage. Families learned not only how to avoid becoming victims, but also how to defend themselves with the strength and resilience that had become the hallmark of military service and family. The training included everything from financial security measures to counterintelligence techniques to legal strategies for protecting military families from court corruption. Derek's children had become active in the Foundation's work, using their own expertise and experience to help other military families. Michael's intelligence background allowed him to identify and investigate threats to military families, while Emma's counterintelligence experience helped families protect themselves from foreign intelligence operations. The Foundation's most successful program was its Family Security Assessment, which provided a comprehensive evaluation of threats and vulnerabilities facing individual military families. The assessment included financial security reviews, background investigations of associates and friends, counterintelligence evaluations, and legal protection strategies. Families who completed the assessment received detailed reports identifying potential threats and specific recommendations for protecting themselves from betrayal, corruption, and systematic attack. The program had prevented dozens of situations similar to what Derek's family had faced, protecting military families before betrayal could occur. Derek's personal life had found a new equilibrium based on the understanding that protecting his family required constant vigilance and systematic preparation. He had never remarried, choosing instead to focus on his children, his work, and his mission to protect other military families from the threats his family had faced. His relationship with his children had become stronger than ever, built on a shared understanding of what they had survived together, and a mutual commitment to the values that had guided Derek's campaign. Michael and Emma regularly sought their father's advice on both personal and professional matters, understanding that Derek's experience and judgment had been proven through the most challenging circumstances. Derek's social circle consisted entirely of people who had proven their loyalty and their commitment to military families. He had no tolerance for casual relationships or superficial friendships, understanding that trust was something that had to be earned and constantly demonstrated. The house where Linda had lived with Gregory for a year had been completely renovated and transformed into a monument to military family values. Every room contained reminders of the sacrifice and service that military families provided to their country. The walls were covered with photographs of military families, awards recognizing service and sacrifice, and documents commemorating the victories that Derek's campaign had achieved. Derek's study contained detailed files on every person who had participated in the betrayal of his family and comprehensive documentation of the consequences they had faced. It was a place of reflection and of purpose, reminding Derek daily of what he had fought for and all that had been won. These files served as both a historical record and a warning to anyone who might consider targeting military families in the future. The message was clear. Betraying a military family meant declaring war on people who were uniquely qualified to fight and win that war. Derek Thorne had proven that some battles were worth fighting regardless of the cost, and that some victories were permanent. 10 years after Derek's return from Operation Dark Water, his transformation from betrayed husband to legendary protector of military families was complete. The Thorne name had become synonymous with unwavering loyalty and the absolute certainty that betraying a military family would result in systematic and permanent consequences. Derek's legacy was not just personal vindication. It was a cultural revolution that had fundamentally changed how military families were protected and how threats against them were addressed. Now, 48, Derek had achieved something unprecedented in modern American society. He had taken a personal betrayal that would have destroyed most men and had transformed it into a systematic campaign that protected military families across the entire country. His methods had been studied, adopted, and institutionalized at the highest levels of government and military leadership. The Department of Defense had formally adopted the Thorne Protocols as standard procedure for protecting military families from foreign intelligence operations, court corruption, and systematic betrayal. Every military installation in the world now had Thorne Protocol specialists who were trained to identify, investigate, and eliminate threats to military families before those threats could cause damage. Derek's consulting work with federal law enforcement agencies had led to the creation of specialized units within the FBI, CIA, and NSA that focused specifically on crimes against military families. These units had unprecedented authority to investigate and prosecute anyone who targeted military families, and their success rate in eliminating threats was nearly perfect. The Thorne Standard had become the benchmark for loyalty within military communities. Military personnel who demonstrated Thorne Standard loyalty to their families and their comrades were fast-tracked for promotion and given access to the most prestigious assignments. Personnel who failed to meet the Thorne Standard were removed from sensitive positions and closely monitored for potential security risks. Michael Thorne, now 24, had become one of the youngest majors in Army intelligence history. His expertise in counterintelligence and systematic threat elimination had made him indispensable to senior military leadership. He was currently stationed at the Pentagon, where he worked directly with Derek on developing new protocols for protecting military families from emerging threats. Their work continued, ensuring that the legacy of loyalty, vigilance, and honor would endure for generations of military families yet to come. Michael's marriage to Sarah Chon, a fellow Army intelligence officer, had been conducted according to strict security protocols designed to prevent the kind of infiltration that had nearly destroyed Derek's family. Both Michael and Sarah had undergone comprehensive background investigations, financial security evaluations, and psychological assessments to ensure their loyalty and their commitment to military family values. Emma Thorne, also 24, had become one of the CIA's most successful counterintelligence operatives. Her work focused on identifying and eliminating foreign intelligence networks that targeted American military families. She had been instrumental in disrupting dozens of operations and had developed new techniques for protecting military families from foreign infiltration. Emma remained unmarried by choice, having learned from her father that trust was something that had to be earned over years of demonstrated loyalty. She maintained relationships only with people who had been thoroughly investigated and who had proven their commitment to American values and military family protection. Both of Derek's children had inherited their father's absolute intolerance for betrayal and his systematic approach to eliminating threats. They understood that protecting military families required constant vigilance, comprehensive preparation, and the willingness to use whatever methods were necessary to eliminate threats before they could cause damage. The Thorne Foundation had grown into a multi-million-dollar organization that provided comprehensive protection services for military families worldwide. The foundation operated training centers, legal support services, financial security programs, and counterintelligence operations that protected thousands of military families from threats they might never even have realized they faced. Derek's annual address to the Foundation had become the most important speech in the military family community. His words were studied, memorized, and applied by military families who understood that Derek's experience and wisdom could protect them from threats that had destroyed families throughout military history. 10 years ago, my family faced betrayal that was designed to destroy everything we had built together, Derek said in his most recent address. That betrayal came from people we trusted, people we loved, and people we believed shared our values and our commitment to family and country. But betrayal taught us something important about the nature of loyalty and the price of trust. We learned that some people will exploit our service, our sacrifice, and our vulnerability for their own benefit. We learned that protecting military families requires more than just good intentions. It requires systematic preparation, constant vigilance, and the absolute certainty that threats will be eliminated completely. Today, military families are safer than they have ever been in American history. As he looked out across the audience of soldiers and their loved ones, Derek knew that his journey had not only protected his own family, but it helped to safeguard generations of families to come. Foreign intelligence operations targeting military families have been disrupted and eliminated. Court corruption has been virtually eliminated through new oversight and accountability measures. The support networks that enable betrayal have been identified and dismantled. But our work is not finished. New threats emerge constantly, and new methods of betrayal are developed by people who underestimate our commitment to protecting military families. We must remain vigilant. We must continue to prepare. And we must never forget that the price of freedom is eternal vigilance, not just against foreign enemies but against the domestic threats that would exploit our service for their own benefit. Derek's personal life had achieved a balance that reflected his understanding of trust, loyalty, and the permanent consequences of betrayal. He had never remarried, choosing instead to focus on his mission to protect military families and his role as a father to children who carried forward his values and his commitment to service. His social relationships were limited to people who had proven their loyalty through years of demonstrated commitment to military family values. These relationships were deep, meaningful, and built on shared understanding of what military service required and what betrayal cost. Derek's home had become a shrine to military family values, and a monument to the consequences of betrayal. Every room contained reminders of the sacrifice that military families made for their country, and the victories that Derek's campaign had achieved in protecting those families from threats. The study where Derek had planned his campaign against Linda's betrayal had been preserved exactly as it was during the height of his operations. The files, photographs, and documents that had guided his systematic elimination of threats remained in place as a reminder of what was possible when a military family was betrayed, and what consequences awaited anyone who underestimated the commitment of a soldier to protecting his family. Linda Thorne remained in federal prison, serving a life sentence without possibility of parole. She had spent 10 years in solitary confinement. Her requests for contact with her children were rejected systematically. Her attempts to appeal her conviction had been denied repeatedly, and her efforts to generate sympathy for her situation had been met with cold indifference from a legal system that understood the severity of her crimes. Derek visited Linda's prison exactly once during the 10 years since her conviction. The visit was brief, clinical, and designed to ensure that Linda understood the permanence of her situation and the futility of any hope for redemption or forgiveness. "I want you to understand something," Derek had told her during that final visit. "Your choices didn't just destroy our marriage or hurt our children. Your choices endangered American military families and compromised national security. The consequences you're facing aren't just personal. They're the price that traitors pay for betraying their country. Your children will never know you, Derek continued. They will never visit you, never write to you, never acknowledge your existence. They understand that you chose betrayal over family, lies over truth, and foreign interests over American values. They understand that you stopped being their mother when you made those choices. You will spend the rest of your life in this prison, forgotten by everyone who ever mattered to you, remembered only as an example of what happens to people who betray military families. That is your legacy, and that is the price you chose to pay when you decided that personal pleasure was more important than loyalty and honor. Derek had walked away from that visit with complete satisfaction, knowing that justice had been served and that Linda understood the permanence of her situation. He never thought about her again, focusing instead on the future he was building with his children and the mission he had undertaken to protect military families from similar threats. The 10th anniversary of Derek's return from Operation Darkwater was marked by a ceremony at the Pentagon recognizing his contributions to military family security and national defense. Senior officials from every branch of the military, intelligence agencies, and federal law enforcement attended the ceremony to honor Derek's achievements and to recognize the permanent impact of his campaign. Colonel Thorne's response to the betrayal of his family has created a new standard for protecting military families and has fundamentally changed how we address threats to military personnel and their loved ones, said the Secretary of Defense during the ceremony. His methods have been adopted by military and intelligence organizations worldwide, and his legacy will protect military families for generations to come. Derek's acceptance speech was brief and focused on the values that had guided his campaign, and that continued to guide his work protecting military families. Military families serve their country in ways that most Americans will never understand, Derek said. We deploy to dangerous places. We serve in classified operations, and we make sacrifices that put our families at risk. Those sacrifices make us vulnerable to people who would exploit our service for their own benefit. But our service also gives us unique capabilities to protect our families and to eliminate threats before they can cause damage. We have training, resources, and networks that allow us to identify betrayal, investigate threats, and eliminate dangers with systematic precision. The most important lesson my family learned is that betrayal is not a mistake. It is a choice that carries permanent consequences. People who choose to betray military families must understand that they are declaring war on people who are uniquely qualified to fight and win that war. The room filled with applause as Derek spoke, the gravity of his words settling on all who had gathered. The legacy he had forged was clear. Loyalty and honor would be safeguarded, and military families would never face such threats alone again. My campaign to protect my family became a mission to protect all military families. That mission will continue as long as there are threats to military families, and as long as there are people who underestimate our commitment to protecting what we hold most dear. As Derek concluded his speech, he looked out at an audience that included his children, military leaders, intelligence officials, and hundreds of military families who had been protected by the protocols and procedures that his campaign had created. These families understood that Derek's victory was their victory, that his protection was their protection, and that his legacy would shield their children from the kinds of threats that had once seemed inevitable. The ceremony concluded with the presentation of a new medal, the Thorne Family Protection Medal, awarded annually to military personnel who demonstrated exceptional commitment to protecting military families from threats, both foreign and domestic. Derek was the first recipient of the medal that bore his name, but he understood that many others would follow in his footsteps, carrying forward the mission he had begun. That evening, Derek returned to his home, where his children were waiting to celebrate the anniversary, and to reflect on everything their family had accomplished together. The house was filled with friends and colleagues who had supported Derek's mission and who understood the significance of what had been achieved. Michael raised a toast to his father, speaking words that reflected the values Derek had instilled in him and the lessons he had learned from their family's experience. 10 years ago, our family faced betrayal that was designed to destroy everything we held sacred, Michael said. But Dad taught us that betrayal is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of a new chapter where we demonstrate what we're truly capable of when we're fighting for what matters most. Dad showed us that loyalty isn't just a word. It's a commitment that requires action, sacrifice, and the willingness to pay whatever price is necessary to protect the people we love. He showed us that some battles are worth fighting regardless of the cost, and that some victories are permanent. Emma added her own words, reflecting on the impact their father's campaign had made on their lives and on military families everywhere. Dad didn't just protect our family, he created a new standard for what it means to be loyal to military families, Emma said. He showed us that military families have unique vulnerabilities, but we also have unique strengths. We have the training, the resources, and the commitment to protect ourselves and each other in ways that most people cannot understand. The most important thing Dad taught us is that forgiveness isn't always appropriate, and that some betrayals carry consequences that should last forever. In that moment, surrounded by his children and those he had helped protect, Derek Thorne knew his battle had not only been worth fighting, but had changed the world for the better. His legacy would live on in every family, every soldier, and every act of loyalty that his campaign had inspired. People who choose to betray military families need to understand that they're not just hurting individual families. They're attacking the foundation of military service and national defense. Derek looked at his children with pride and satisfaction. They had not only survived the betrayal that had threatened to destroy their family, they had emerged stronger, wiser, and more committed to the values that had guided Derek's campaign. They understood that protecting military families was not just a personal responsibility. It was a national security imperative that required constant vigilance and systematic preparation. As the evening concluded and the guests departed, Derek stood alone in his study, looking at the files and documents that had guided his campaign 10 years earlier. The systematic destruction of Linda's betrayal network was complete. But Derek's mission to protect military families was ongoing and would continue for the rest of his life. The photographs on Derek's desk showed his children at various stages of their lives, as confused teenagers trying to understand their father's absence, as young adults learning the truth about their mother's betrayal, and as accomplished professionals carrying forward the values their father had taught them. Each photograph represented a victory in Derek's campaign to protect his family, and to ensure that betrayal would never again threaten what he held most dear. Derek opened a secure drawer and removed a document that he reviewed annually on this date. A comprehensive list of every person who had participated in the betrayal of his family, and a detailed accounting of the consequences they had faced. The list was complete, the consequences were permanent, and the message was clear. Betraying a military family carried a price that would be paid in full, regardless of how long it took or what methods were required. Linda Thorne. Life in federal prison without possibility of parole. No contact with children, no possibility of redemption. Gregory Hoffman, executed for treason. Spy network completely dismantled. Legacy destroyed permanently. Rebecca Stone, disbarred, imprisoned, reputation destroyed. Career and credibility eliminated. Margaret Henley, marriage destroyed, reputation ruined, social standing eliminated, isolated and abandoned. The list continued for pages, documenting the systematic elimination of every threat to Derek's family, and the permanent consequences that had been imposed on everyone who had chosen betrayal over loyalty. Each entry represented a victory in Derek's campaign, and a deterrent to anyone who might consider targeting military families in the future. Derek closed the file and locked it away, understanding that his work was complete, but that his vigilance was eternal. The threats to military families would continue to evolve, but the principles that had guided his campaign would remain constant. Loyalty is non-negotiable. Betrayal carries permanent consequences. And a soldier's greatest strength is the family he will fight to protect, no matter the cost. Betrayal carries permanent consequences, and protecting military families requires whatever methods are necessary to eliminate threats completely. As Derek prepared for bed, he reflected on the legacy he had created, and the future he had secured for his children and for military families everywhere. His campaign had begun as personal revenge against specific individuals who had betrayed his family. It had evolved into a systematic transformation of how military families were protected and how threats against them were addressed. The man who had returned from classified operations to find his family destroyed by betrayal had rebuilt his life, protected his children, and created a legacy that would endure for generations. Derek Thorne had proven that some men never forgive, never forget, and never stop fighting for what they believe in. His war was over, but his victory was eternal. Military families would be safer because of what he had accomplished. The Thorne standard would protect military children who weren't even born yet. The consequences of betraying a military family would be understood and feared by anyone who might consider targeting soldiers and their loved ones. Derek's final thought before sleep was a prayer of gratitude, not for the destruction of his enemies, but for the protection of his family and the preservation of the values that made military service possible. He had fought the good fight. He had kept the faith. And he had finished the course that duty and honor had set before him. The next morning would bring new challenges and new threats to military families. But Derek was ready to face them with the same systematic precision and unwavering commitment that had guided his campaign against Linda's betrayal. His children would carry forward his mission. His protocols would protect future generations, and his legacy would ensure that no military family would ever again face the kind of systematic betrayal that had once threatened to destroy everything he held sacred. Derek Thorne had won his war completely and permanently. His victory would protect military families forever, and his legend would serve as an eternal warning to anyone who underestimated the commitment of a soldier to protecting his family. The price of betraying a military family had been established, documented, and made permanent. That price would be paid by anyone foolish enough to test Derek's legacy or to threaten the military families who lived under his protection. Some men forgive, some men forget. Derek Thorne was not one of those men, and military families were safer because of his refusal to accept betrayal without permanent consequences. His war was over. His victory was eternal.